Any firefighter around long enough will tell you how fire itself has changed. Once primordial, with homes made of wood, glass, and metal, fires are now loaded with plastics, electronics, and flame-retardant furniture. A toxic soup of known carcinogens, leaving behind a thick black soot that sticks to firefighters like tar.
We're a toxic sponge when we go into some of these fire situations, absolutely.
Like most firefighters, Steve Shapira took a measure of pride in the grind. For more than 1,000 fires in 17 years as a St. Paul firefighter, until he was diagnosed 3 years ago with non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And he wasn't the only firefighter who was sick.
I got 4 calls in 1 day of new cancers in St. Paul.
What kind of cancers are we talking about?
I think one was a skin cancer, one was an oral cancer, there was a testicular cancer.
They take an oath to say, look, I'll sacrifice myself if I have to save somebody else. They're sacrificing themselves every single day by going into these toxic environments.
In Albert Lee, in a department of 16 full-time firefighters, 3 developed cancer within a year.
It was a big hit on our department.
Brett Boss, a marathon runner, was diagnosed with a rare bone cancer at 31.
And this comes right off our body right away.
Then arson investigator Doug Johnson was diagnosed with inoperable brain cancer. He died 3 months ago. He was 51.
Even if he would have known it increased his risk of cancer, he still would have fought fires and did what he did, I'm sure. And I think most firemen still would too, because it's just in their blood. Yeah.
That may not be all that's in their blood. Firefighters are twice as likely to develop testicular cancer. There's a greater risk of multiple myeloma, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, skin and brain cancer, along with prostate, stomach, and colon cancer. Minnesota is one of 33 states that recognize these cancers as occupational hazards of being a firefighter. Steve Shapira had 2 doctors who said his cancer was job-related, but the city still denied his workers' comp claim.
When I asked them that very question myself, they said they don't see it that way. They see it as I had equal chance of getting cancer as anyone in St. Paul.
Who made that decision in the city of St. Paul?
Someone in risk management.
In St. Paul alone, 10 firefighters have filed cancer claims, but the city couldn't tell us whether any had been accepted. According to OSHA, in the last decade, only 1 firefighter in all of Minnesota had their cancer accepted as an occupational injury. The problem becomes establishing a definitive link between exposure and cancer.
And it makes sense. I mean, these are guys who potentially are exposed to, like I said, any possible chemical or compound you can think of, and it's also on fire.
And while a firefighter's turnout gear is effective against heat, ultraviolet light shows how particles of soot can seep into the gaps around the face, neck, hands, and legs. And underneath 25 pounds of gear, firefighters become human sponges. With every 5-degree rise in skin temperature, absorption goes up by 400%.
Your skin opens up. The pores of the skin literally become larger, and they absorb what's on the outside of the surface.
Dr. Susan Shaw took blood samples from a dozen firefighters within 24 hours of a blaze and found their blood had 3 times the level of fire retardant chemicals.
When you compare the levels that firefighters have after a fire response with the levels in the general population, they're hundreds of times higher.
This is really about the constant exposure from the stuff that's still on your gear after the fire.
Absolutely. It's the care and use of that gear once you get back to the station.
State Fire Marshal Bruce West says after every fire, turnout gear should be cleaned in a specialized washing machine.
This one will clean 4 sets at a time.
Known as an extractor. But these machines are expensive, at least 10 grand each. Minneapolis and St. Paul fire departments now have extractors in about half their fire stations. But the State Fire Marshal worries about smaller departments. Of the 20,000 firefighters in Minnesota, 18,000 are volunteer or part-time.
A firefighter in, East Overshoe, Minnesota, who's going to go home to their family, you don't want them taking that home to their family.
Do we have any idea as we sit here how many firefighters may have a cancer that is due to exposure to these carcinogens?
That's not statistics that we have.
My understanding is that no one's keeping those numbers.
You know, State Fire Marshal Division doesn't have those statistics.
And that is the problem. No one knows how many Minnesota firefighters have cancer or whether they have the right gear. So the Fox 9 investigators sent a survey to every fire department in Minnesota, more than 700, to see if they're getting the help they need. Out of more than 100 responses, 1 in 5 departments told us they had at least one firefighter diagnosed with cancer. 1 in 10 had multiple cases. Lung cancer and non-Hodgkin lymphoma were the most common. The bad news, according to our survey, 27% haven't taken any education or prevention measures. The Montrose Fire Department is among those who have had a wake-up call. They've begun wiping down their equipment. And a few weeks ago, thanks to a state grant, they got an extractor to wash their gear.
We're, upwards of 2 times more susceptible to getting cancer than the general public because of these fires that we're going into. And having the gear washer extractor, if we can knock those numbers down a little bit, that's a win for us.
But only 68% of the Minnesota fire departments in our survey have an extractor. 87% don't have a second set of gear for each firefighter. 63% don't have a spare hood. Many departments are switching to new high-tech hoods.
This is one of the new hoods that they came out with.
That are better at keeping out small particles. Perhaps most alarming, 80% don't believe they're getting enough education and support from the state and federal government. Think about that, 80%. It amounts to a cry for help from the very men and women who have the courage to run into buildings on fire.
And they know that at some point, I'm going to go see my doctor and he's going to give me some bad news and that's going to be the big C. And you're always wondering, was that related to my job?